Today we're going to start chapter 22, lesson number 1, and the title of this chapter is Illegal Drugs. Now before we can discuss and talk about specific types of drugs, I think it's really important that we understand what are some of the different risks that are associated with drug use. As you'll notice, we have two vocab words on this screen. The first one is substance abuse. Now substance abuse is a word that we've defined in a previous chapter, but nonetheless it is defined as any unnecessary or improper use of a chemical substance for a non-medical purpose. Now, a good example of this might be somebody who is using cough medicine in an attempt to get high or to catch a buzz, rather than using it for the medical reason of controlling a cough. The next one on the screen is looking at illegal drugs. Illegal drugs are defined as any chemical substance that people of any age may not lawfully manufacture, possess, or buy or sell. Using illegal drugs is a crime called illicit drug use. I think what's really important here is that we all understand that illegal drugs and illicit drugs both mean the exact same thing. Now on this slide right here, you're going to see that we're looking at what actually is substance abuse. On the right hand side, we're going to see that substance abuse is any overuse of a drug. That might be, instead of using the directed or prescribed 2, 3, 4 tablets at a time, someone might be using 5, 6, 7 at any given time. The next one talks about multiple use of a drug. That might be you're directed or you're prescribed to use that drug maybe once or twice in a day. Now we have people who are using it 4, 5, 6 times in any given day. The next one talks about use of an illegal drug. Anytime an individual will use an illegal drug, regardless of what the reason is, that is defined as substance abuse. And anytime somebody combines a drug with alcohol, that is also defined as substance abuse. A lot of times when you use a drug in combination with alcohol, that will create a synergistic effect, and that effect becomes multiplied. It becomes very, very unpredictable, and some really harmful things can happen to an individual who is mixing drugs with alcohol. Now, what are some factors that are going to influence teens in the likelihood of them using illegal drugs? The first one, as we will see, is peer pressure. Anytime a teen surrounds themselves with other individuals who are using, there's a better chance, or a greater chance for that matter, that that teenager might begin to experiment themselves. When you look at family members, research does show that if an individual grows up in an environment where mom, dad, maybe brother, sister, or other family members for that matter are using, then there's a greater chance that that teen might begin experimenting and using as well. We all have role models. We have people in our lives that we look up to. If those people that we look up to are using, then there's a greater chance that that teenager might use as well. So it's just really important that we surround ourselves with good people who are living their lives in such a way that's going to help us understand how we're supposed to live as well. If we're surrounding ourselves with people who possibly are using or doing negative things, then it's just human nature where we might begin to do some of those things too. The last three looks at the media. What types of messages are they sending? We need to look at, be careful about the perceptions of drug behavior. There's a lot of people out there who believe that they can control their drug use, that it's okay to experiment and it's okay to use, but a lot of people lose control early on with the drug use, and addiction could obviously be an end result. And the last one is misleading information. There's a lot of information, whether it's on the internet, whether it's just peers sharing it, that is not valid or it's not correct. So we just got to be careful about that. But if all of these, peer pressure, family members, role models, media messages, perceptions, and misleading information, all of these can be factors that might influence a teenager beginning to use illegal drugs. On this next slide that I'm going to show, you're going to see a short video, and then after the video we'll discuss some of the vocab words that you're going to see on the left-hand side.
The teen years are a time of newfound independence as kids begin to become adults, venturing out into the world, making their own decisions. It's also a time many will experiment with drugs and alcohol.
Experimenting with drugs and alcohol is nothing new for teens. Consider these statistics. By the age of 14, 41% of kids will have had at least one drink. The average American boy will take his first sip of alcohol when he's 11, while American girls try a little later by the age of 13. The average teen begins drinking regularly just before turning 16, around the time they get their learner's permit and driver's license. Drinking or using drugs before the age of 15 triples their risk of becoming addicts. Consider this sobering stat. Right now, 3 million teenagers in the U.S. are alcoholics. And that's just one substance. Teens today have greater access to a lot more drugs than ever before. And many of them can be found right inside your house. High school and college students have been known to abuse ADHD drugs like Ritalin to help them study or control their appetite. They might try steroids to help them bulk up. Or they snag their parents' prescription painkillers from the medicine cabinet because they've heard you can get high off of them. Teens' brains are not yet fully developed. Pot, alcohol, and other drugs can impair brain development and lead to permanent changes in the teenage brain. Taking drugs at any age can lead to addiction, but teenagers are at even greater risk. The younger you are when you start using drugs, the greater your chances of developing a dependency. Parents need to stay involved in their kids' lives and let them know early on about the dangers of drug use. Providing your teen with a stable home environment and a close, loving relationship is the best thing you can do to prevent alcohol and drug abuse. Establishing rules and boundaries is a key part of that. Even if they don't like it, kids need to know what's expected of them and what is acceptable behavior. Peer pressure can also play a big role in substance abuse. Whether a teenager is a misfit or runs with a popular crowd, having a low self-esteem and feeling like they don't fit in can make them try things in order to look cool. If all of their friends are doing it, there's a good chance that they will do it too. That's why it's imperative for parents to keep the lines of communication open. Common signs of alcohol or drug abuse in teens include withdrawing from family and friends, doing poorly in school, discipline problems, anger, and hostility. If you suspect that your teen is using any illegal substances, even if he or she is just experimenting, talk to them immediately. If their behavior continues or worsens, seek professional help. Remember, the sooner you can get them help, the better their chances of kicking an addiction.
Now, there's a lot of great information that came from that video, and hopefully you're able to pull out some of those key points. On the left-hand side, you're going to see that we have some vocabulary: overdose, tolerance, psychological dependence, physiological dependence, and addiction. I think it's important that we all understand when we look at psychological dependence and physiological dependence, typically the first type of dependence that's going to develop first will be the psychological, but usually that's also the most difficult one to break. But many times when an addict will eventually go to treatment, typically the first week or two they're working on the physiological or the physical dependence, working through those withdrawal symptoms. But the bulk of the treatment is actually working on trying to break that psychological dependence. And the very last vocab word you notice on our screen is looking at addiction. Addiction is when the user has both a psychological and a physical or physiological dependence on their drug of choice. Now on this screen, you're going to look at what are some other effects, and this one right here is looking at what the addiction cycle is. What causes that user to use over and over and over again? Now the first thing that's going to happen is the user is going to take their drug, whatever that drug of choice is, to try to get some short-term pleasure. It might be to feel high, but at the same time, for a lot of addicts, the reason why they use is just to feel normal and to help them get through the day. Then what ends up happening is as the effects of the drug wears off, so the user took their drug, and typically they have to take it in larger and larger amounts because they have developed a tolerance. At some point in time, the effects of that drug are going to wear off. And then the user starts experiencing some of those withdrawal symptoms. It might be they have their headache, they have their shakes, they have their hallucinations, they have their sweats, etc. and nobody likes to go through withdrawal. So what ends up happening with the user is that is what causes them to want to use the drug again, to help relieve those withdrawal symptoms and to help repeat that feeling that they had of that short-term pleasure. So as you can see, the cycle continues over and over and over, and it's very difficult for an addict to break that cycle because first off, they want to feel that little bit of pleasure, but more importantly, they don't want to feel those withdrawal symptoms. Our last slide now is looking at what are some of the consequences. For a teenager who's using an illegal drug, what are some of those consequences? And you'll notice here on our screen, they might stop pursuing their interests or their goals. They might begin engaging in dangerous behaviors. They might engage in sexual activity, act recklessly, be depressed, a higher risk of suicide, more likely to be involved in violence or crimes, and possibly be arrested. So as we can see here that a lot of teens who do begin using drugs, tobacco, alcohol, typically they're going to be getting in trouble with the law, grades are going to struggle, problems at home, missing curfew, kicked off their sports teams, etc. So typically, there's not a lot of good things that are going to happen from somebody who's using drugs, tobacco, and alcohol.